Everybody, Big Toad here, and welcome to my studio. I want to do a painting based on my mixing green exercise. If you saw that video, you saw where I went through and mixed a lot of greens and mixed other colors off of it based on greens and that simple palette. And this painting right here that I'm going to do today is based 100% on that mixing exercise and the colors I mixed. Down below, I will put a link to that video, mixing greens, which will show you how I mixed every color I used. This painting is a commission work requested by a friend and customer. So I went ahead and sketched it in. I'm not showing you my reference materials because it is commission work, and so I just feel like when I do that kind of work, I need to keep that a little more private. So I start out after the sketch in, going with my darkest darks, and I'm using the ultramarine blue burnt sienna to put all my darks in. Now I know my trees are going to be a dark green, so I'm going to block in my pine trees using my darkest green that I mixed up. I will be putting highlights on the sunny side of these trees eventually, but I don't block that in at this point. I'm going to block in some of the ground in front of the trees with a lighter green to create some contrast and separation. You'll probably notice, though, that as my painting matures, I recognize that I need to put a darker foreground in front of this set of trees. So that will happen. And you know, that's part of the painting process. You go a direction, and then as it develops, you realize there's opportunities to improve your painting. And so you take those, and it's part of painting is to recognize that. So I will come back in and darken up some of these areas to create that moody, darker, tonalist type effect. So these trees are going to be dark when I'm done. After I got those blocked in, I went and started blocking in the distant mountain ranges. Again, using a gray, which I mixed up in that green exercise. And I'm coming back in with a lighter color further back. I'm going to reduce the color as we go back further away. I'm going to use that same color to produce some shadows and highlights on the mountain. And now on this mountain, I'm coming in with some greens and topping it off with some grays on top. I'm creating a little greenery at the lower elevations. I've got a lot of work to do on these mountains, but I do want to get them blocked in. And I started doing some texturing of the mountains with the colors I've got, but I'm going to change those pretty drastically as we move forward. Now the front mountain, I'm bringing in a little darker as I bring it forward. Again, as the mountain fades away, I want to make it lighter and lighter, and as we move forward, more darker and more prominent. Some higher chroma also as we move forward. So I'm adjusting the mountain a couple times, trying to get the so that the mountains fit in well. Laying out some shadows in the water. And then I want to start blocking in the rocks that I'm going to put down in the foreground. And again, I'm using grays. I'm going to rework all this. Now the sky, I take some of the blues I created, the lighter grayish blues. Kind of make a moody sky out of it, coming in with some darker clouds, darker grays, lighter grays to add depth to the clouds. Of all the parts and pieces of the painting, the sky, I'm not overly excited about. It works though for the time being. And as I sit around in my studio, I may go back in and touch it up later. I have to look at it for a while though. So again, that dark moody sky, clouds, I got some grayish bluish sky on the top, and working some dark patches in around the mountains. Going to create that contrast somewhat between the mountains, distant mountains, and the sky. Not too much. That farthest mountain there, put some clouds around it, so you kind of lose the top of that mountain in those clouds. So still adding more depth and darkness to the sky. If I have a tendency to overwork something, it's cloudy skies. And what I recommend for myself is spend a little less time painting and more time backing up and looking. Skies and clouds, for some strange reason, can be difficult for a lot of people, myself included. Getting that natural look, we tend to overwork it. Simplified clouds and stuff, I think, work better. I put some little bit of purples in this as well. Again, made up of the Alizarin crimson and the ultramarine blue. I did go back. That's the one change I made from the palette that we created out of the green exercise. I created a little bit of that color, but I did have to add quite a bit more of it to the purple. So I'm going to leave the clouds the way they are now. So I blocked in the water with the blue. And now I'm going around and throwing in some highlights and dark patches around my trees. I did not block in all my darks up front. I don't always do that. And with these trees, I wanted the composition to kind of help me figure out where it was going to look once I started putting the color in. So that's why I'm coming back in now and putting the darks in. I always wanted to have darks here. I just didn't block it in that way. But that's the first step after I got the basic block in done of my colors, is to go back with the darker darks to start laying that out there. And I work on the darker darks through a lot of this painting, just looking for experimenting and trying to find the look I want. There's a lot of these artists that you'll find on YouTube. They're really good at knowing exactly, planning it out to the nth degree before they get into it. And they know exactly where all their darks are going to be, and they do that, and then they make minor adjustments. Sometimes I can do that with my paintings. This one is not that way. I have to experiment a little more with it. And I'm not saying that's the best way. I'm just saying that's how I had to do it on this painting. And you'll find it too, where you get an idea, but it's not enough and you have to experiment. So be willing to experiment with your paintings. If you don't press your barriers and do some experimentation, you're not going to learn as much anyway. So you saw I worked in the water. I'm working back on the right side, taking that water backwards and around that little peninsula that sticks out there with the trees on it. So starting to create that look. I'm using some of those aquamarine blues and some darker hues of that. As the water goes back away from us, make it darker. As it gets further and further away in this cloudy sky, that works really well. And then I can haze it and break up and haze the area where that water hits the far shore. I don't want that to be a line. I want that to get lost between the haze of that water. And so I can take that water darker as I go away, but then lose it and meld it into the lighter mountain. Up front, I on the right side in front of those little trees, I did some nice work there on that. I really like how the water turns out in this painting. I think it looks neat. And I work forward on this other side, capturing shadows and such, and creating depth by the darker water at the farther shore. Again, I think that's an effective way of doing it. Changing starting the shadows with greens here. I have more greens in the tree. And shadows are often a little darker on the water on a cloudy day, especially than the actual reflection. I mean, not shadow. The reflection is actually a little darker typically than what it's being reflected from. So again, work for a little while on these trees and the reflection there. Adding some greens and just using small little brush strokes with this little filbert I'm using, which that thing is getting more out because I love it so much. I don't love it because it's high quality. It just is, I don't know, I got used to it. It's a comfort brush, and you'll find those too. You won't have any other good reason you use it other than you like it, and you get it in your hand and you know what it's going to do. So that's a comfort brush. And so I work on these rocks a little bit as I go around them. I don't want to overwork the rocks. They're in the foreground, so I want to create some movement in them, but I don't want to overwork them. Working still on the water, Here I'm going to put some nice darks, especially as on these rocks as we move forward this direction a little bit. I'm going to get some nice darks in there and build some light on top. I'm going to come back in with several attempts and mess around with the colors a little bit on the rocks to get what I want. You know, and again, sometimes I go in first shot, my rock is done. These though, being so prominent and towards the front, I spend a little bit more time. Again with the water, I'm kind of working from, I worked from the back and around this into this foreground now in the water. And throwing in some more dark on this this right side corner. I want to push people's eyes away from that corner towards the trees, trees and into the rocks. And that dark really does that. It works as a frame, as it pushes your eye away from that side. And on this left side, I'm going to make darker water over there to try to have the same effect. Get that darker hues in that water, using some of those darker aquamarines and bringing in some of that dark, and just pushing people's eyes away from the edge, away from the bottom, away from the corners, like I do. And that gives it a nice moody look, a cloudy, gloomy day, but yet there's still a beautiful color in the water. The trees still stand out, and I work these shadows, incorporating, or I keep saying shadows, reflections. Keep working those reflections to kind of reflect the colors that I get in the water. And you know, water is not the same. If you ever had the opportunity to look out at a still lake that's really quiet early in the morning, a mountain lake, and you see the reflections of the trees across the lake, well, you might not even feel a breeze where you're at, but you can see the breeze push the surface of the water, not evenly across the whole lake, but in little sections, as if somebody just reached down with a 20-foot wide hand and just rustled the top of the water. And you'll see those reflections and that water, you know, where it's being blown by the breeze, it come up in different places. And so you can have places where there's more reflection and less turbulence or less waves, little ripples in the water, and then you have places where it's very smooth, and because you can really watch the wind and how it flows differently across the surface of the water in some places. Now I'm going to work on these mountains some more. I want to bring them more in line with the water. I just want to use those lighter blues to create depth and distance more in my mountains rather than the greens that I have. But I am going to use the greens in the mountains, but I'm going to you can see me putting some in here really lightly now. I'm going to use the broken color approach, where small strokes of various colors that I've utilized throughout the painting to create that depth and the mixture of color and kind of break up the distant mountain. So those blues are kind of leaning towards the green, and that's why it works here as well. And I'm taking some of those greenish blues, and I started putting in little distant pine trees faded off in the bottom. And I'm moving forward now and putting some little brighter pine trees on the little mountain ridge in front of that. Again, you got to be aware of your contrast. You lose your depth if your contrast is off. So what's in front needs to be a different value than what's behind it. And in this case, because the things get pushed further away, often they become more muted colors, softer. And so for those trees, I went with a lighter color. I can go now with a darker color on that mountain. This one I'm working on here on the left, because it needs to be a little darker than the mountain behind it. And again, I'm using a lot of colors here. I'm using a lot of my palette, a lot of the little greens, a lot of the various blues and the hues of the turquoise that I created, and making very small brush strokes with each one with maybe a little bit of that color on it. I'm trying to create the illusion of texture, which provides an illusion of detail on those mountains. So I like to use those small brush strokes to do that in that broken color, adding in bits of color here and there. So if you get up close to this painting, you'll find that almost all of the greens and blues that are all over this painting are somewhere in those mountains, and they're used. And I got a little bit of yellow in the mountain. Yellow is kind of a green if you think about it. Colorblind people have difficulty, of course, with blues and greens. They sometimes can't tell the difference, and so that's why blues and greens, you can shift between them, and sometimes different people see the shift differently. Two people can look at a color and one of them say, well, that's more blue, or another person will say, well, I think it's more green. And as the light hits it, as it can change right before people's eyes just by talking about it and by laying another color next to it. And that's what the broken color will do. You add the different colors to in small little strokes to create various illusions and movement of color. So added a little bit of texture to the clouds to create a little bit of, I don't want to overwork it, so I did a little bit of clouds. Now going back to the right side, working on those mountains as well, using the same techniques, creating depth with the hues and the shades of my colors, making sure that I can tell the difference between the different planes of those mountains, the further mountains being lighter, and as I move closer, they'll be darker. And that's typically the key. Now, sometimes you will have something pushed further away that is a lot darker, especially if the sun is in front of you and you're looking towards the setting sun. Then where the shadows cast can be a lot darker. So way off in the distance, it can be darker, and you can get lighter. And then as you get, where the shadows are, where the sun's hitting, it'll be darker still. So that can mess with but even then you have to worry about contrast. And so as I create this painting, I'm shifting the colors around, creating contrast. Now on this hill over here, on this mountain, I'm throwing in some more trees. I'm going to work a little bit on the trees to create some contrast between my trees. Then I'm going to bounce down to my water. I don't want to overwork one area a lot of times. As I work on something, then I stop and I look somewhere else and think, oh, I can go here. Don't get hung up too much in one place at a time, or you'll start overworking it. If you stay too long in one place, it'll lead to overworking. And a lot of times what we do, and if you ever decide to record your paintings, you'll learn this, that as you rewatch your recording, you'll realize, oh, I should have stopped there on that mountain, or those clouds look better 5 minutes ago than they do now. I've messed them up. And you'll see that a lot. Hindsight's 2020 if you look at your videos. And actually videoing up my paintings has helped me grow and mature in my painting ability just by watching how I make things worse sometimes by working on it. And you just got to stop. Always stop before you want to stop. Because you have to. Because we're painters, so we just paint. And if we don't learn to stop sooner, we're gonna rework on our paintings. Now I'm going in here and adding some contrast to my trees. What I want to do is I want to create a little softer look with the trees. I want to make sure I have contrast between the trees next to one another, but yet still let part of them meld together. As you look at a forest, you'll lose the details of one tree as it mixes in with another tree. In some places, though, we'll get sunlight and you can clearly see it. And so I want to create that kind of imagery in this painting. In some places, I want a clear separation based on contrast. And in other places, I want to lose and blend those trees in together. And that's part of the creativity is stepping back and looking at it as how can I create contrast where I want it, and where do I need to blend my trees together. And so lower in the trees, it's usually darker, less sunlight down there. That's a great place to create some melding of the trees, to lose the trees closer to the bottom, especially when you're dealing with a pine forest like these. They're thicker at the bottom because they're wider. Whereas if you go into an oak forest or something like that, or a forest of maples and hardwoods and stuff, you'll find that they get darker closer to the top, where the foliage is much deeper because they kind of go, their trunks grow up and then they sprout limbs and the leaves. So you will get dark shadows underneath those trees, but you'll have some of your darker darks in the trees themselves at the tops where the trees are really growing out leaves. Where pine trees tend to often work backwards from that. So again, creating contrast, going back in with different hues of these greens. I kind of want to bring them all kind of more lined up together across the three little forward patches of trees there. So I come in with my palette knife and start creating some grasses around the painting. I come in with a rigger and paint some grasses in, and to kind of break up some of those larger spots and create some I don't know, some reality within the painting, and to give it some depth. Well, I'd like to add little bits of detail here and there, because that little detail then goes a long way. I add a little detail here with some grass, and it makes the viewer's eye just believe that there's detail everywhere. Adding in another little pine tree over here just for something fun, a little bit of grass on the edge of that. You notice in this painting, this is, I don't think I've done a video where I painted these kind of pine trees before. You know, the kind of the more abstract, impressionist type pine tree. And that's what I was going for. I mean, everybody knows it's a pine tree, but it's jagged, it's crooked. You know, I asked my granddaughter, I said, "What do you think of these pine trees?" She's 10. She says, "Well, they're kind of funny." I said, "Yeah, I know." And she says, "They're all jaggedy." I said, "Yeah, I wanted something different." And I did. And you also see here in the finished painting, I did lose some of my video, but in this finished painting, see how brilliant those aqua blues and greens work in the water. The rocks, you can see I've basically all rocks, you need to start with the idea of three colors: a dark, a medium, and a light. And so I've done that. I added some little the mauve type color I mixed up in the green exercise. I came back in with, you can see little specks of golden flowers out there. I did come back in with some straight cad yellow medium. I like to do that and just add a few little flowers. Again, it creates depth in that section. Those flowers are clearly closer to the viewer. They're closer to the water. It sets those trees back a little deeper away from you. It creates contrast between the brighter area where those little flowers are, and then the darker colors under the trees. There's the things I like. I like the water. I think the water turned out nice here. The trees are different kind of tree than I normally make. Obviously, I make a lot more realistic trees typically when it comes to pine trees, but I'm looking for more abstract here, and I think this does this. Again, if I did anything, I wish I could have maybe not worked so hard on the sky. I worked a little bit too hard up there, but it works. It works well enough. That's my least favorite part. But the eye's kind of drawn to the rocks, into the sunny area up on that shore with where the little flowers are. Then you kind of follow that around and you hit the clumps of trees on each side, the reflections on the left of those trees, bring you to those trees. You go up to the mountain, and then you kind of drop down the mountains into those trees and back to the center. Maybe you roll back up to a mountain and follow the lines of clouds over. And so the painting tends to take your eye back and forth and bouncing off of the edges where the dark is. So, well, I hope you enjoyed this painting. I think this is a great example of, again, this was based on the mixing greens exercise that we did in that previous video. So I'm going to link that down there so you can take a look at it. I hope you enjoyed this. I hope you learned something, and thanks for watching. This is the Big Toad, and I am out.